Good evening, everybody. It's Joe Chaffee on this Thursday night, the 11th of October, on what has been a very long week with Michael still in play this evening. I know a number of you have been talking about it on the let's call it the pre-chat before tonight's live stream with the video that is out there publicly with regards to what the damage was in Michael, specifically in Mexico Beach, where the hurricane made landfall. I'm no expert, but I looking at the damage, it's hard to imagine that this wasn't a Category 5. At the very least, we know it was a strong 4, and who knows? In post-analysis, they may wind up upgrading this to a Category 5 down the road. The bottom line is, when you see the destruction that a storm like this can cause, I really have to shake my head and wonder when people decide that they're not going to evacuate, especially if they're in the face of getting the eye of the hurricane or being just east of the eye where the massive storm surge occurred. Just absolutely astounding, and it gives you a real respect for the power of nature, for sure. And we're still dealing with issues tonight with regards to Michael, as it has brought flooding rains through the Carolinas and through parts of Georgia yesterday and last night, now through the Carolinas and into Virginia today. Our regular Johnny Quest, another 4 inches of rain for him in Western Virginia. And we've got a little bit more work to do before we finally get this thing out of the way. But I'm going to start off tonight with the radars. So I'm going to let me just maneuver here just a second. You know what? I know what I'm going to do. We'll start first off with the Storm Prediction Center with the severe weather issue that's going on tonight. We do have a tornado watch box that has been shrunk down to some degree, but we do have a tornado watch box up for southeastern Virginia and northeastern North Carolina. This, as Michael moves along, it is moving northeast of Raleigh-Durham now and near the Virginia border, and will be making its exit in short order off the Virginia coast. And there are some interesting things that are going on right now with respect to the character of this system, because we are starting to see it make this transition over into a extratropical system. So I'm just going to put the chat board up here for me to see. I'm going to pop it out and move it to the side so I can see what you guys are talking about while I got the maps going. And first things first, why don't we start off with the surface map, because I think this is going to illustrate pretty well what's happening here. And where did it go? There we go. There's our surface map. I was trying to load the radar over it. It's actually in the process of refreshing. One of the things that occurs when a storm goes from being tropical to extratropical is you start to see the wind field change somewhat. And the Hurricane Center pointed this out in their 5 p.m. discussion, where you're getting you're actually getting stronger wind gusts that are occurring west of the surface center. You look at the winds, you can figure out where the surface center is. It looks like it's just, here's Rocky Mount, and they've got some light southeast winds, but they are getting some gusts up to 18 and 25 miles an hour, and of course the gusts are even higher along the North Carolina coast. So the surface low is sitting somewhere north of Rocky Mount, near the Virginia border, perhaps. It's also getting a little bit stretched out, but notice the winds on the northwest side of the storm. We're getting some gusts up into the 40s and 50s. And when the center of this gets closer to the coastline, I think it's going to intensify. And you're probably going to see some very strong winds that will develop in through Chesapeake Bay and through the southern parts of the Delmarva Peninsula, even a little bit further north than that, along the Delaware coast perhaps, and on up into the coast of southern New Jersey when this is all said and done. This is going to wind up being a tight little low that moves on out to the northeast. The other thing we've picked up on tonight is the fact that the northern area, the northwestern edge of the precipitation, much like it did yesterday, where it began expanding and wound up going into northwest Georgia in a spot where none of the models really pushed the rain that far north, and significant rain at that. We are seeing a bit of a bulging here, so I think that is going to probably bring some heavier rains to the coastal counties of New Jersey, certainly to Delaware and down into over the Delmarva Peninsula, and obviously we've got it already in eastern Virginia. But we might see that heavier rain make it up for a little while through the coastal counties of New Jersey, and probably even through Long Island, specifically central and eastern Long Island. I think stand a pretty good chance here of getting into some of that heavier rainfall. We'll look at this on first I'll give you the view on the national radar, because there really isn't a whole lot happening except for what's going on in the east. I'm going to start with the Upton radar, and this is for my neck of the woods. So as of 7:09, we are getting these waves of downpours that have been moving on through. Now, this is not Michael related. This is the cold front that is pushing in from the west. So you really have two things at play here. You've got the circulation from Michael. You've got this cold front pressing east. And were the front stationary or really just crawling eastward, you probably would see the center of Michael continue on more of a northeast course, a north-northeast course, rather than a course that's more northeast. So say 020 degrees versus 050, which is where how it's moving now, and that is going to take the center off the Delaware coast, and then on on northeast from there. It's probably going to pass pretty close to 40 degrees north, 70 degrees west, which the snowstorm buffs all know that is the benchmark spot that they look at in the wintertime. But radar, at least locally, showing some heavy downpours. We've got flash flood watches up for much of southern New England, back to New York City, the Hudson Valley, Long Island, New Jersey, except for some reason they left out the northwestern counties. I'm not sure. The two northwestern counties of New Jersey, I'm not sure why. Southeastern Pennsylvania, and then, of course, we have the flooding that's already going on as we go further south. The next radar we can run down to is, I'll bring up the Fort Dix radar, which is out of the Mount Holly office, and the downpours is a gap here in southern New Jersey, southeastern PA, and then you start to see the rains that are involved with Michael pushing into parts of south central and about to go into southeastern Pennsylvania, but really you're seeing a larger concentration now showing up in Maryland, and that area is expanding and moving northeastward. The next radar shot we'll go is to Dover Air Force Base. The echoes now are moving southeast northwestward across eastern Virginia, and that is around the circulation of Tropical Storm Michael. And we'll jump. Also, by the way, you can see the green boxes. So that's all. Those are all flash flood warnings that are up. And on to Wakefield, Virginia. Now, here's where we can actually see on the radar where the circulation is. Also, notice, again, as it makes this transition over into more of an extra tropical storm versus a tropical storm, the rain shield is north and northwest. There really isn't too much going out to the northeast, nor is there much of anything going on as you go south of the center. So it's basically starting to look like a quote winter storm in terms of its character and in terms of its satellite and radar signature. A lot of heavy rain here in this in this area. Look at all these flash flood warnings that are up, and they continue. By the way, also down into North Carolina. We'll jump down one more radar so you can see the southern edge from the Morehead City, North Carolina radar, picking up the southern edge of the precip, and it becomes more showery in nature as you head south of the Virginia-North Carolina border. Again, part of this transition, and you can also see the bands, the outer bands of this. part of that's the tropical character of it, the bands that extend out off the Outer Banks with some heavy rains embedded in there. And this is all lifting up toward the northeast. The tighter radar view will jump to that. And I guess this is a good time for me to remind everybody that we're at 7:13 Eastern Time. So if you are watching this later on a replay, note the time. The radars are dated. So make sure you check your local National Weather Service office by going to weather.gov for the latest with regards to any watches and warnings, and for the latest look on the radars. And it's getting to where almost the front and the storm are kind of becoming one, although the frontal boundary showers that are going on still remain a somewhat of a separate entity from Michael itself. Michael's kind of wagging the tail here as it's moving eastward. And that center, again, once it gets into Chesapeake Bay, being that it has some tropical characteristics, and the ocean water going to the east-northeast of there as it heads out toward 40 and 70 is fairly warm. So you've got those two things working here, where you've got the non-tropical strengthening elements, the upper air trough that is getting involved, and you're going to get a juice from that, and you're going to get juice from the warm water. So we could see a tightening of the pressure gradient along the coast. So that's why I'm thinking, at least for the immediate coastal areas, right along the beaches, down from New Jersey and the South Shore of Long Island southward, there will be gales. And just offshore, there are storm warnings that are posted for winds of 50 to 60 knots. The Hurricane Center actually strengthens this back to 60 knots after it becomes post-tropical. Scott Briller had a thunderstorm in Freehold, New Jersey. I did notice on the radar that there are some thunderstorms that are bubbling up a little bit in the area that's moving across New Jersey into New York City and Long Island with some heavier downpours. Nothing severe, but I did notice a few lightning strikes starting to show up in a couple of places. And behind all of this, as Shelly Man Studios points out quite correctly, is that we're going to get some really cool air, and we're going to discuss the upcoming weather pattern change that will be getting underway. Okay, so the HRRR map, courtesy of TropicalTidbits.com, and Levi Cowan, by the way, did another, as always, an absolutely fantastic job with his coverage of Hurricane Michael. So here we've got the NAM, and the NAM is also doing this kind of northward bulge of the precip field, and we'll move it in motion. There we go. So there's your low center coming up now on 11 o'clock Eastern Time. This is where we see the low in Chesapeake Bay. You'll notice the frontal boundary showers are about done. So now you've got this comma-shaped cyclone that is moving offshore, and there is an east-west arc of very heavy rain into eastern Maryland, Delaware, and into southern New Jersey. And then, again, grazing Long Island with that, so getting a little bit more enhancement. Notice the pressure does drop to 989 millibars and then to 985. This is at 5 a.m. It's at 37.8 and 72.83. The northern extent does not extend far north of New York City. It cuts off. So this is going to be more for central and South Jersey, for Long Island, maybe touching south coastal Connecticut on the northernmost fringe of this. And by tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., we have a 985 low. I think it might wind up being a little bit deeper than that. It's at 39 and a half and about just shy of 71. By 9 a.m., we're roughly at 39 and 3/4 and 70, just shy of 70 and a half. And here we are at 10 a.m. right about at very close to 40 and 70. So it looks like this thing's going to go right for the benchmark. That also, by the way, brings in some heavy rains into southeastern Massachusetts, southern Rhode Island, the islands in and around Nantucket, also to Cape Cod, getting into some heavy rain. And then this is at 18 hours when it's pulling away. So weather conditions are going to start to improve. And again, on the back side of this, on the western side, I think we're going to see some rather strong gusty winds. The HRRR is probably as good as any model at this point on the short range. I don't really disagree with it too much with what it's doing. Here's the 10-meter wind field, and I'll back it up. Now here's where the local forecasts with high winds being forecast for Chesapeake Bay. They're going to be near that low center when it starts to deepen. There are going to be some gusts to at 50 or 60 miles an hour, I would imagine, right down through Chesapeake Bay. And then also you can see when the low moves offshore, these are sustained winds of 40 plus along the Delaware coast up to about Cape May. Tomorrow in the morning, you've got gales, sustained gales up the coast all the way to Sandy Hook, and by 7 a.m. sustained gales along the south shore of Long Island. There will also be some wind gusts inland as well, as that cooler air starts to get drawn down from the north. This is basically going to just behaving as if it were a non-tropical system. The rainfall over the next 18 hours, that's something that we should take a look at as it lines up. So this is on top of any rain that has already fallen. And you can see the NAM model has rainfall amounts in excess of 5 inches across much of northeastern Virginia, down into eastern Maryland, southern Delaware, and then you start to get into a fairly solid 2 to 4 inch rain amount, 2 to 4 inch rain amounts in central and south Jersey, and then going into central and eastern Long Island and into southeastern New England. So it's behaving pretty much according to plan. Maybe a little bit more of a westward bulge in the precip. The bottom line is it's going to keep on moving, and it will be all said and done, and weather conditions will be improving rather quickly during the day on Friday. Timothy Veltman, thank you. You answered the question. Greenfire asking about what time zone the models. It's Greenwich Mean Time, Greenwich England Mean Time. That is a universal time, so this way everybody's just on one clock when it comes to the weather maps. So at 15Z, which is 11 a.m. in our time, it's 3 p.m. London time. So you add 4 hours, depending on where they are in terms of if they're still in daylight time. I know there's sometimes when they switch over to standard time, they do it a week before we do, or a couple of weeks before, and when they switch the other way, they do it a couple of weeks before. But basically, it is London time. Midnight would be 0Z is midnight, Greenwich Mean Time. So that's 8 o'clock our time, p.m. So now, where is all of this taking us going forward with respect to the weather pattern? Well, you are going to finally see autumn, not just here, but across a large part of the U.S. getting involved in this new weather pattern that is emerging across the United States. And I'm gonna bring up the GFS and just get it ready to show you what's going to happen, and then we'll do a little analyzing with respect to the pattern. So let me just rev this up. The GFS, by the way, in terms of the rainfall, is a little bit further to the south with the 2-inch line, but it's probably underdoing it considering the downpours that we've had today. A lot of places getting into some heavy rains. So I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up seeing an upside surprise in terms of the total rainfall. So I'm going to just set this map up, and then we're going to go back I'm going to go back to. We're going to look at two the change in the upper air that's taking place, and we're going to do it by going back a bit in time. This is Monday's upper air, the upper air pattern across North America. We could see a good chunk of the Pacific. We can see a good chunk of the Atlantic, and of course, you go all the way up to the pole, all the way down into the tropical regions. So this is what it looked like on Monday morning, where we had this big upper high in the east, big upper high in the Gulf of Alaska, deep trough inland of the west coast, running down right along about 110 degrees west, going all the way down. We also have a deep trough out near the international date line. There's a lot of amplitude here in this pattern. In other words, a lot of big ups and downs. You got deep trough, strong ridge, deep trough, strong ridge, deep trough out in the Atlantic. And this is the upper air signature of a warm pattern for the eastern half of the United States. Michael, at this point Monday morning, was coming out of the Northwest Caribbean, and I drew the track of Michael moving inland over the Florida Panhandle, and then northeastward from there, and a little bit more, let's call it east-northeast, once it gets out into the open waters of the Atlantic, and it runs out pretty rapidly across the Atlantic, by the way. But again, you notice how the pattern is, a lot of amplitude, trough at 180 degrees west, ridge in the Gulf of Alaska, trough at about 110, ridge in the east, just east of 80 degrees west, and then another trough out in the central Atlantic. This is what it is going to be changing to, okay? And here's the flip. And that is a huge change everywhere in terms of the overall pattern. So you got a couple of things happening here. The entire ridge in the east breaks down. So does the trough out in the central Atlantic. You'll notice that there's a ridge, a little finger there that's pointing out of the picture in the upper right. That is a ridge that's building up in the Atlantic. So now you've got the ridge where a trough was, there is a ridge. In the west, you have the ridge in the Gulf of Alaska moves eastward into the Canadian Northwest, and the trough that is along the international date line, part of it starts to push into the Aleutians, and then you have energy that drops down near 160 west, north of Hawaii there, and you still have the same idea where you have strong trough, strong ridge, strong troughing in the east, in most of the U.S. being dominated by this big change in eastern Canada too, where we have three upper air vortexes, this sort of rotating around each other. The first one, and this is the map I have, by the way, this is a map for Saturday night, and we have a trough rotating through New England. So this is the shot of cool air that is coming in for later Friday and for Saturday into Sunday. And then we have a second system that is dropping into the northern plains, and that's probably going to bring somewhat of a reinforcing shot of cooler air during next week after Monday. There'll be a bit of a front to push on through into the eastern part of the United States. The pattern that we see going forward seems to have staying power. So I think we're going to hold on to this for quite a while, and we might be able to, at least as far as I can see, over the next 2 weeks and a little bit beyond that. You could make a case that it might even go longer than that as we go through November. But we are definitely seeing a big pattern flip, and it's a radical pattern flip. You might say that this is sort of what happened last year when a switch was flipped in the latter part of November, and suddenly we went into the ice box. Well, we're not going to go into an ice box, but relatively speaking, we are going into colder than normal temperatures for sure. But we're having it happen a full 5+ weeks earlier than I did last year. So it's an interesting development. We've gotten used to warm in the east anyway the last several years of having this sort of extension of summertime. Last year's was particularly long. It lasted into the month of November, but this time around, it is going to get cut off. And you're going to, if you really like cool fall weather, this weather pattern change is definitely for you. So let's look at the GFS here and see where it's taking us. We're going to start in the east, and there's your low, representative of Michael, just passing south of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, by the way, and moving out. And we've got an upper air disturbance that's going to be moving through for Friday night into Saturday across the Great Lakes there and into the Northeast. So there might, for those of you in the regions of Pennsylvania to southern New England, there and down into northern Virginia and on up into parts of upstate New York, don't be too shocked if you see a couple of showers. And I did notice, by the way, at least up on the NAM in parts of upstate New York, in the middle and upper Hudson Valley, and maybe in the northern Catskills where there's some elevation, it could be some sleet or a couple of wet snowflakes in the mix with this. That moves out, high pressure builds in, and now we have the next front. This is Sunday. Another front is pushing into the northern lakes. And yes, that is snow that you see back through northwest Kansas and Nebraska and into Colorado. And we're going to take a look at that specifically in just a second. But that next front comes through on Monday with some showers. Doesn't look particularly wet, probably just some scattered showers with this. And the southern part of the front has a little tail to it, so we see some showers Monday night into Tuesday across parts of the mid-Atlantic, but they don't look especially heavy. And now we have a second shot of cool air that comes in for the middle part of next week and beyond. And it actually looks overall fairly dry. By the end of next week, there's another disturbance that the model's indicating moving up through upstate New York and northern New England with some rain and snow showers there. But again, the theme here going forward, I think, is going to be for cooler than average temperatures in the short and medium term. Now, let's shift over to the west so we can make some of the snow lovers happy here. And starting from tonight, where we're seeing some patchy snows in probably elevated areas of the Colorado Rockies and into northern Wyoming. You can see Sergio, by the way, in the lower corner there, rearing its head, Tropical Storm Sergio, as it gets ready to go into Baja California. We have a system that's going to be dropping down out of Canada. Remember, there's that next short wave that's rotating around those three upper lows I showed you before. That one drops cold air southward, and you get that east wind up the mountains. So that provides some lift, and you squeeze out some moisture, and the air is going to be cold enough that we'll probably see some snow into Wyoming and parts of southwestern South Dakota into Nebraska, and that eventually pushes its way southward into eastern Colorado and into northwestern Kansas. That's a pretty good gradient there with that northeast wind and that high pressing southward. So there might be a surprise little early snowfall here for parts of Kansas and eastern Colorado. Nothing huge, but a reminder of where we're going with the winter season. And temperatures are going to be certainly cold enough, probably down in the 20s. And that moves on southward. There's no real storm with this. There's no real surface low that is coming out of it. You'll notice that the high really drops pretty far south, creating even some snows into northern Texas, northwest Texas, and down into New Mexico. So the snows even get down into the southern Rockies here. The push of that high brings a front down pretty far to the south, and you start to get into what will likely be some gusty winds along the western Gulf Coast. This is not from a tropical system, but it's mainly just the gradient between the high up to the north near the Oklahoma Panhandle and lower pressures that are going to be down in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. The snowfall from this, and I don't know about these specific amounts. I'm just showing you what the GFS is generating, but you can rest assured that I think there will be some accumulating snows for somebody in this region out in the west from all of this. And also notice a little bit of first snows in northern Minnesota, northeastern South Dakota because of that cold flow. that is coming out of Canada. I'm also, before we get to the tropics, I want to at least bring back the upper air on this run. I have not seen it all the way through on the new GFS, so I'll be curious to see if it maintains consistency with the prior run. But we'll go back to the beginning here with that ridge in the east and the trough in the west, and you can see the big changes. I'll run it through a couple of times so you can watch each area change. Watch the change out, and first let's watch the Central Atlantic. And you can see that the trough, the trough that is out in the Central Atlantic just kind of flattens a bit, and the ridge begins to disappear, and then the trough lifts out. So you start to get that ridge to build. Now you watch what happens in the east as the upper high disappears, and you start to get these three vortexes that are up, or vortices that are up in Canada, and they start pretty much rotating around each other. And then you can watch the change that goes on off the west coast with the upper high in the Gulf of Alaska that weakens and shifts eastward into northwestern Canada, while the trough at the international date line drops down into the Aleutians. So all of these changes, monumental changes going on across the northern hemisphere here with respect to the upper pattern. Now, longer term, there's your next trough for the middle of next week. That lifts out. Now, you do have an upper high that is an east-west, very flat-looking upper high from Florida, east of the Bahamas, and westward into the Gulf of Mexico. This is going to probably create lower than normal pressures in the Caribbean going forward, and which makes sense because this is where you're getting to that time of year now as we push deeper into October and November, that your area of development is going to continue to come westward, and the Atlantic is going to become less and less of a player. But that upper high is there off into the Bahamas. Just running through now, we're at day 10. And you see how the trough keeps wanting to come back into the east. Even though it does lift out, you do see it lift out there for a brief time, and then it comes right back in the long range period. Also in the longer range, and I don't know if this is going to hold up, but there's been a few runs building that ridge up along 40 degrees west and taking it right up to Greenland. So you've got a bit of you've got strong ridging up there that's developing up in the North Atlantic. Whether that means that we go into some kind of blocky pattern long range or not remains to be seen. But if you're a cold weather lover and you're a snow lover, you certainly want to see the ridge in the east go away and be replaced by the trough in the east. And you do have ridging here that goes up into the Pacific Northwest, which is another perhaps longer-term positive sign. Please bear in mind, we're very, very early in the game here when it comes to wintertime weather, but we're going to start seeing these seeds being planted going forward now as we move through the rest of the month of October. Just want to show you, too, in terms of snow. Now, this is not snow cover, but this is forecast snow over the next 10 days. The numbers aren't important as much as the coverage area, I think. How much of this actually stays on the ground remains to be seen, but it is going to start playing a role in the building of snow cover across North America, and we know that that does have some impact on our winters, certainly. You look at some of the winters where the early snow cover growth in Canada was non-existent, and that usually didn't bode well for cold air masses building up. But we're seeing what appears to be a healthy dose of early season snows across Canada. We saw them in September, although during the month of September it's likely that, except in northernmost Canada, much of that snow is disappeared, or in the higher on the mountaintops it might be there. But now we're going to probably see snows in the lower elevations, and of course you see the reflection of snow going on in the central and southern Rockies and even into the plain states. Now we'll take a look at the tropics. We can see what happens. We still have Leslie, in case anyone's forgotten. I'm going to leave the wind map up, and we'll use that. So this is from late this afternoon. Nadine is down here at 13 and 35-ish. That'll be gone soon. Leslie, which has been around for almost the better part of 2 weeks and almost for 3 weeks when it's all said and done, that is going to move straight eastward or east-northeastward, and at least on this run, it brings it in to southern Portugal and Spain. It seems like it's got an identity to it as a tropical storm, and brings it in. This is going to be over the weekend on Saturday night into Sunday. This is noontime Saturday. This is Saturday evening, and then we've got midnight Sunday, 6 a.m. Sunday, noon Sunday. At the same time, we're going to watch Michael now as it comes off the North Carolina coast. And Michael is going to start racing across the Atlantic, passing south of Nova Scotia, probably close enough to southeastern Newfoundland where you get into some rain out of this. And then across the Atlantic, heading toward France. It looks like, south of Ireland. It also begins to weaken somewhat, and I think that has to do with the fact that you've got this deepening gale center southeast of Greenland that develops, and it appears like it just basically absorbs this. It does bring some wind and rain into Ireland and England on Monday, and we'll put the precip map up. I'll bring the map of Europe up now, and we can take a look at take a closer look at both Leslie, which comes into the picture here on the lower right. This is at 6 a.m. Saturday. So now we have noon. I'm using the time zone for Western Europe. 6 p.m. Sunday, midnight. 6 p.m. Saturday, midnight Sunday. There's Leslie coming in to southern Portugal and Spain as it goes inland from there. And with respect to Michael, you can see it here on the right in the middle at the same time. Again, it looks like it weakens because that gale center that's developing northwest of it probably absorbs most of that. And here comes that low, which passes, by the way, pretty far to the west of Ireland and England, but there's an occluded front that's going to lift up and around, so you do get into some rain and wind here over Ireland and England, and this is going to be for later Monday. So this is 6 p.m. Monday. Then we've got midnight Tuesday, 6 a.m. Tuesday, noon on Tuesday, and that low, by the way, then gets pushed to the east across northern Scotland. Of course, at this point, we're into day 6. There'll probably be some adjustments as to where the surface low is actually going to be. But very interesting that you're getting both Michael and Leslie are going to wind up impacting Western Europe in some fashion, either a bit more directly in the case of Leslie or a bit less directly in the case of Michael as it gets absorbed by that system that's going to be to the north and west of it. So let's come back. Let me come back here just really quick. This is probably a good time. I'll do it here in the middle, and then we'll go to the chat board and I'll take some of your questions. I have more on the change in the long range. If you check out my platform on Patreon, can I make this any bigger and more obnoxious? I have a platform on Patreon. You get my website posts with no ads on them. Plus, you get a lot of other posts that are not on the website, and I don't share or don't post on other venues of social media. So there's a lot of stuff, and there'll be more stuff coming along that'll be exclusive to Patreon members. And also, once I get my energy back, when it merits, you'll get exclusive videos that'll just be seen by Patreon members. I was doing them in the morning. Then the hurricane kind of swept everything up in terms of my workload. But once things settle down, I'll go back to doing just the Patreon, the video in the morning. And it's a subscription base. It's just $2 a month. The price is basically of a cup of coffee. If you're interested, I will put the link is on the descriptor to this live stream and on the descriptor to this video, but I'll stick it in there on the chat. And and I appreciate those of you who have joined or those of you who would consider to join. And by the way, you can message me on Patreon, and I will respond in a timely manner. Israel, it's very easy to use. Just pull it up on a desktop or pull it up on a phone. There's a Patreon app. Just search for meteorologist Joe Cioffi, and I should come up. And again, very, very easy to use, and you should download the app for your phone. So let me put the link up. And there we have it. All right, so the link is up there. Thanks very much again for those of you who have joined and those of you who might consider it. Okay, so one of the things, by the way, at least a great lesson that was learned with respect to what just happened with regards to Tropical Storm Mike, with Hurricane Michael, I should say. Tropical Storm Michael is what it is right now. But with Hurricane Michael was the fact that you had this system happen that formed over the late last week. We watched it in the Northwest Caribbean. It really came to live over the holiday weekend and the Columbus Day holiday weekend, and that was especially problematic because it was a holiday weekend. People, kind of zone out a little bit. Plus, you had all the stuff that was going on in Washington with the Supreme Court nomination that was just dominating the news wall to wall. That also probably cut back on the significantly on the amount of coverage. I had a number of people tell me, which I thought was a little weird at first. They were saying, "Why isn't this getting the kind of play it should get? Why is it not being played up by the media like it usually is?" And I think the answer to that is the fact that unlike other storms, and certainly unlike Florence, where we basically watched it for almost 2 weeks, this one just developed relatively quickly, and it developed in our backyard. And this happens. This is not unusual. This happens. CNN might make you think it's unusual because they did a story implying that, but it's not. And that's why it's important that you pay close attention to it. It was a little difficult to do this weekend. I just wonder how many people might have made different decisions had they had more lead time. But the reality is that you're going to have situations like this from time to time where you're not going to know about a system a couple of weeks in advance or 10 days in advance or in advance or even in a week in advance. So if anything is a takeaway from this lesson, for those of you who were not impacted directly by either Florence or from Michael, it's always good to just do the things you need to do to make sure that if something were to happen, you've got your stuff ready, whatever supplies you might need. Use these as opportunities to just make sure that your batteries are working, you got your flashlights and everything else. I know we're at the point where we're winding down the hurricane season at this point. It's also highly unlikely for a storm that would hit the East Coast to come as a last-minute surprise, although I can remember with Hurricane Belle in 1976 forming in the Bahamas basically on as I remember, very late in the week, and then moved up the East Coast the following Monday. So sometimes they can fire up relatively quickly. So just bear that in mind, that it's not always that you can watch a system come off the African coast and then move it along and watch it every day. Tropical weather outlook from the Hurricane Center after tropical weather outlook from the Hurricane Center. Joyce Mack, Ireland has gotten their fair share of weird weather in the last couple of years. The atmosphere, we think back to last winter, we had the atmosphere stretched out to extremes across North America and across Europe. I was reminded by Dr. Judah Cohen, who was on the other night with us, we're talking about the winter, about the beast from the east that happened in late February and early March, and getting a blizzard and a foot and a half of snow in Dublin, which rarely happens there. Yeah, definitely. And we've seen a couple of strange things happen over the summertime. You had a very dry, very hot summer there up in Ireland and in the UK. Now we'll see what's going to happen going forward. Are we getting into a different scenario with regards to this winter? Well, that remains to be seen. So Green Fire, just remember that the time in Zulu time, it's a military number, so it's a 24-hour clock, and it's 4 hours ahead of us. So midnight London time is 8 p.m. our time. So just subtract 4 hours. And that would be 0Z is midnight. So 21Z, okay, 21Z is 5 o'clock our time, and that would be 9 o'clock London time. That's it. Very easy. Johnny Quest, who picked up another 4 inches more of rain and broke another normal for the month record. Since Michael went to the east side of the Gulf, could something form in the western Gulf? One of the issues, Johnny, with respect to that, what I was showing you before, and we can actually bring it up. Let me just bring back up the GFS here. We'll bring it back up and look at specifically what's going to be happening in the western Gulf, because it's a little bit different this time around. And I'll put the we'll put the this region up so we can watch it play out. So let me back away. Let's back up a little bit. So there's your high that starts to build down. If you look at the upper left, that's a high that's building down. This is not going to show snow, by the way. It's only going to show rain. So you've got lower pressures in the southwest Gulf of Mexico. Now there's going to be a frontal boundary here along the Gulf Coast. So south of that, you'll have your tropical air, and then you're going to have your polar air that's going to be through Texas, relatively speaking, just quote unquote. We'll put polar in quotes. But this is cold air that's up through Texas. This is not like we have some big upper high and hot tropical conditions like we have in the summertime. So if something's going to try and form, it may wind up being something that gets pinned down in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. You can see the isobars here. The pressures do drop as you go southward. You'll have breezy conditions along the Texas-Louisiana coast because of the pressure gradient, the high up to the north, a 1033, 1032 pressure there in North Texas, a 1014 pressure down in the southwest Gulf. So if something's going to happen, you might see something try to form in the southwest Gulf. But again, the problem is that from the standpoint of development is that it's going to be basically pinned down in its tropical environment because of the frontal boundary that is to the north. I can remember an instance, I believe it was in the late 70s, of something like this where we had a tropical storm develop in the Gulf of Mexico in the tropical environment, and then you had the frontal boundary along the Texas coast, and just inland of that frontal boundary, they were getting 40 to 50 mile an hour gusts for several days along the Texas coast, with a tropical storm not too far to the south, but the tropical storm itself never really had impact. The tropical storm, as close as it was basically the function of the lower pressure to the south and the big high that was up to the northwest of it, creating this really tight pressure gradient in the cold air. So it was in the 40s and 50s along the Texas coast while this was going on. And meanwhile, on the other side of that frontal boundary, where in the tropical air mass, you had a tropical storm. I believe it was Henri. I'm not 100% certain. I'd have to go back and check. But you might have something try to go in the southwestern Gulf. And again, I'd also keep an eye on the Caribbean, even though it's not really showing anything here in the longer term. We did have a couple of model runs back a few days ago trying to bubble something up here. In its longer term. It backed away from it at this point on this run and in the last couple of runs, but we've seen that happen before where it backs away and then it winds up coming back as you get a little bit closer to the short range. Okay, let me come back to the chat board here. Let's see. Joyce Mack, if you're having Facebook video cuts, if the Facebook video cuts out all the time, are you talking about the Joe and Joe show? Okay, you're discussing how to use the app in your conversation, I guess, with whoever it was you were talking to. Sorry. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, I did not. We Joe and I were both very tired last night, Israel. We did not do a Joe and Joe show last night. So we'll probably do one tonight. We both have a little bit more energy. But sometimes when he and I get overwhelmed with all the stuff we have to do, that come 8:30, 9 o'clock, we're just wiped out. And I looked at him last night at about 8:30, and I said, I don't know about you, but I really just don't feel like doing it. But yeah, Anthony Orr pointing out, our resident statistician about Michael, as it moved inland into southwestern Georgia, it was a Category 3 hurricane, the first one to impact the state as a major hurricane since 1898, and it came up from the southwest. It didn't come in on the east coast of Georgia, the Atlantic coast where Savannah is, but it came in from the southwest, and that was highly unusual. And how rare is it? We're talking about something that hasn't happened in over 100 years. Longest tropical system in the Atlantic is over 30 days. I believe you're right, David Schwartz. I'm sure Anthony will dig up. There have been several. I think he posted it yesterday or the day before. There have been like 3 of them that hung around for 25 or almost 30 days. Ruthless Goat. Cold and snow after a torrid December predicted for you. Yeah, we went over it just a little while ago. Patrick McGill, nice to see you here. Have I seen much different in terms of the weather pattern over the last 20 years? I had this conversation, was having this conversation the other day, and also I think I mentioned it on one of the videos. I've been doing this for 40 years. And the question is, in a 40-year time frame, is that long enough where you could see every possible situation? And the answer to that is clearly no. I think, I've seen a lot of weird stuff and a lot of things that have happened in the last 15 or 20 years that didn't happen in the prior 20 years. So I don't know that I would be able in my entire professional lifetime or in my lifetime period am I going to see every weather possibility there is for my neck of the woods. That's why weather is such a humbling profession because just when you think you have it figured out, you don't. And even the best of forecasters, there are a number of forecasters out there that I have a lot of respect for, and they are great forecasters. They really know their stuff, and every once in a while they do make calls that are wind up being off. Okay. And that's the nature of that's the nature of this game that I'm part of. There are going to be instances where you're going to look at something, think that you've got it all figured out, and you're going to be thrown a curveball out of left field. Carl Weitz, the UN, DOD, NASA, CIA, and most world organizations have concluded that climate change has altered the weather. Well, Carl, look, that's a political discussion that we could probably eventually wind up getting into. And I've been trying not to go in that particular direction. By the way, thanks for hitting Super Chat the other night. I saw you did it, and I really appreciate it. Look, the Earth has warmed. Rather than get into the political stuff, let's just say this. We have seen a warming of temperatures across the Northern Hemisphere. And that probably has had some impact in terms of the amount of precip increasing it in some places. I posed the question about whether that has had some impact in terms of the number of 20-inch plus snowstorms that have occurred over the last 18 years. has been considerable in my neck of the woods, certainly, and through the Northeast as compared to the prior 30 years. So, is that temperature rise having an impact there? I would, say yes, but this sort of stuff is above my pay grade. I try to steer away from, when you start to see it in terms of the body politic when they discuss it, and I really would rather focus on when the folks that are working in it, that are actually doing the research. Judah Cohen talked about this with respect to bringing up the climate change that has changed certain things with regards to of the weather patterns that he watches and the impacts of the rise in the rise in temperatures. So I'd rather have it come from that source because they're working with the data rather than coming from entities that may or may not have reasons for saying certain things. If you follow my logic there, and yes, climate is always changing, and there may be other drivers to it. Oh yeah, no, and I understand, Carl. I know you didn't mean it as a political statement. I just didn't want it to evolve. I don't want anybody to misinterpret, and we start getting into this discussion of the political stuff. And no worries. I totally get it. Ryan Ford, if a trough is strong enough and more amplified for the autumn months, is it possible for the eastern U.S. to get December, January level cold and snow? Well, we certainly saw that last year. I would just say, just bear in mind that just because we're seeing this pattern now emerging does not necessarily mean that come the end of November or early December that we could very well get another pattern flip. So this is why I don't get too wrapped up in the long range, long range, because I really have a tough, and I've said this so many times, I have a tough time getting my head around it. I don't think that's breaking news here on this channel. But in terms of the long range, there's just too many things that can happen. Look how radical the pattern changes from what I showed you earlier between what we saw on Monday and what we're going to have on the maps by early Sunday morning in terms of the upper air pattern. It's a complete 180-degree flip that's going on. And patterns can set up and lock in and hold on for a long period of time, and then they can change almost on a dime. I guess what we would look at in terms of my approach is we make the broad assessment about what we think it's going to look like over the next couple of weeks, and then just keep our eyes open to the possibility of where the next seeds that are going to be planted to usher in the next round of pattern changes. Michael was part of this process. So was Leslie in terms of maintaining a ridge on either side of it as it remained trapped in the central Atlantic. So they all play into each other, and when one of them changes, everything changes. It's basically just a downstream of effect that goes on. So this is what we'll be looking at going forward. But for now, at least from the pattern that we're going into, it looks like it'll probably hold for the rest of this month and maybe even into the beginning of November. After that, I really am not going to venture a guess. Yes, if you join late, you can always rewatch this as it uploads into the video library, and you can take a look. I know, James, you said, what can do you expect from Michael? Well, if you're on Long Island or if you're in coastal New Jersey down into Delaware, just briefly, we talked about this. We are going to see probably a surge of rain overnight before it pulls out, and also perhaps right along the immediate coast, some gales, certainly some gusty gale force late tonight into Saturday morning before all the cool, dry air comes rushing in. David Alcock, Leslie stalls over the Canaries and dumps all its moisture into the... I'm not understanding what you're meaning by, what you're posting there. So if you would like to clarify that, I would appreciate it. Let's see. Just want to make sure I did not miss anybody here, and I probably did. And if I did miss your question or comment, I'm sorry. David Schwartz, can't believe that people like Jim Cantore still go out in hurricanes like they do. Oh, well, okay, look, I'm not going to, everybody makes their choices. It's not a choice I would make. And, God bless him if he's got the strength and the ability to want to do that. That's wonderful. I have perhaps you might want to say I have a bit more of a delicate nature. I just would not, I made it to almost the age of 60. I would like to keep on going for a while. I just would not put myself at risk. And frankly, I don't, I question the news organizations. I watched some of the videos from the storm chasers that were out there and sitting out there while stuff was crashing into their vehicles. I mean, all the more power to them, and thank God, from what I understand, from what I've understand or have heard, I haven't heard of anything tragic happening. Thank God for that. But it's not something that I would do, and I don't know, when the heads of the news organizations that ask these people to go out and stand in these storms, I really hope that they have their safety front and center. And Joyce Mack, you are correct. I do go out in snowstorms. But that's because I can stay relatively confined. I'm not likely to get a 100-mile-an-hour wind gust. I've done it where, I go out into the front of my house and into my driveway. That works. And also when I'm working, I'll go outside the building where it's relatively safe. I'm not going to go out where there's road traffic with the possibility of me either getting hit by a car that loses control, or perhaps by a snowplow as it's dumping snow off to its side. We've seen videos of people getting caught by snowplows along the way. I'm not doing that. Anyhow, let's call it a night at this point. Let me just remind you, as Ryan Ford is reminding me, there is no admission or a charge. There's no charge of any kind to come on out to the Springfield Library in Springfield, New Jersey. That is next Wednesday, October the 17th, right? 10th, 17th. Yeah, October the 17th at 7 p.m. The Springfield Library in Springfield, New Jersey. Just Google their website. You can get more information on that. I was told that you don't need to register. You can just show up. The more the merrier. Everybody's invited. We'll be talking about what just happened, and we'll maybe look ahead at what the rest of the fall and the winter might bring. And of course, I'm always open to questions. So be sure you bring your best questions along with you, and take advantage of me being there. Let's see. The Weather Channel puts people. Patricia Janowitz. Oh. I had this. I know you've been on before. I'm just going to call you Patricia J. Okay? The Weather Channel puts people in the way of harm, but they always are put on the periphery of the storm. Well, like I said, everybody's got to make their choices and the decisions when it comes to that sort of stuff. And we are at least take pride in the fact, by the way, that when we have these situations happening, that we approach them from an even-handed way. I think those of you who have been here long enough know that is how I operate here. We try to keep things even-handed. If I get nervous about something, if I get worried about something, that's your time to worry, okay? And the number of times that I have been worried over the years has been extremely rare. Chris Alley, if he's still on, knows that one of those times was with Hurricane Sandy, because I expressed my worry with regards to that. All right, so let's. The plan is tonight for a Joe and Joe weather show on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee, and you can check that out. It'll be on at about 9:15 Eastern time. If you're not on Facebook, and we wind up doing the show, which I think we will, I will upload it to YouTube a little later on tonight, and it'll go on Patreon first, and then YouTube a bit afterwards. So you can check that out on either platform, but you got to be a member of the Patreon platform. And by the way, I put up a long-range post today, and I'm going to be doing more of this. I do is a signature long-range post that I do is under the name Joe Stradamus, and I usually do it throughout the fall and winter season and into the spring. But especially for the winter season, Patreon members will get to see those posts before anybody else. In some cases, you will get to see Joe Stradamus posts that will not be publicly released. And I did one of those earlier today, so that's another benefit of being part of the Patreon platform. We're going to be back to once-a-day live streams going forward, unless another surprise hurricane shows up. We don't see anything in the cards, so that's a good thing. And we'll be back tomorrow. Probably shoot for 7 o'clock Eastern time for our live stream. The only thing that might change that is if I wake up tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock with pouring rain and gusty winds, because I'm out in central Long Island, so I'll probably get into some of that heavy rain and maybe even some gusty winds down along the coast. I'm about 9 miles inland, but it's not a short ride. It's a relatively short ride for me if I wanted to take a quick ride down over to the bay and to the ocean. So everybody stay safe. Scott, the library presentation usually lasts 90 minutes. Okay, and oftentimes we bleed into the parking lot afterward when the library wants to close down and no one's left. So we go out and finish our conversations out in the parking lot. So that's next Wednesday, October 17th, 7 o'clock at the Springfield Library in Springfield, New Jersey. In the meantime, everybody have a great day, what's left of it, and a great Friday as we bring the week to a close. We will see you tomorrow.